Hello, and welcome to the Freebirth with Jesus podcast by Awaken Birth. I am co host Alison Collins.
And I am co-host Nadia Taylor. We are radical Christian mothers and birth keepers who are passionate about Jesus and free birth.
On the podcast, we will share testimonies of Christian mothers from all across the world who have free birthed with Jesus, and we'll talk all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Welcome to the Freebirth with Jesus podcast. I'm Alison and here's Nadia with us, and we have Destynie as our guest today. We're really looking forward to her sharing her story, and the exciting part about this podcast today is that this is our first episode. Let's see what God does with this. I'm really excited. So Destynie, if you could just let us know a little bit about yourself, and then once you're ready, just feel free to start talking about your birth story.
So I'm Destynie. I am a wife. I've been married for 4 years with my husband here in, I guess because y'all are in Australia, I'm in the U.S. So I'm in the northeast section of the U.S., which is Connecticut. And we have 3 children. The first we lost at 6 weeks, so that baby's in heaven. And then I have 2 here with us on earth. We have a 3-year-old. Her name is Corinne, like Corinthians in the Bible. And we have a son, Elias, who is almost 3 months. And I free birthed him. I had Corinne in the hospital, and I free birthed him at home, and it was amazing. So I guess I could start. I want to say first, when I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to share, my journey to free birth this baby was pretty complicated, and I needed to kind of just give a little bit of a backstory, if you guys don't mind. Because I feel I was always a Christian, like I was born a Christian, very Christian household, went to Catholic school growing up, and I kind of fell out of faith I fell out of relationship with Christ when my father became an alcoholic. My mother and my father were married my entire life growing up, and then their relationship kind of fizzled out, and I feel like their relationship to Christ kind of fizzled out, and then just by proxy as a child that kind of happened. So I felt like I never really wanted to have a family, and I realized that's probably because of maybe the difficulty of being in that house. And nothing ever happened, like as far as violence or anything. It was more like he had disappeared, if that makes sense. And I know now, like having the Christ loving husband that I have, I never really wanted a family. And I know I kind of fumbled my way Christianity wise for a long time, until I was about 25, and I actually moved across the country, met this amazing group of young people who had this Bible study, and they just were so pumped for Jesus that it made me pump for Jesus. And met my husband shortly after that, and I told him I absolutely want to have a family, and I wanted to get started right away because I was kind of like in my late 20s. And it's ridiculous now to think about, but at the time I was like, yeah, I want to do this. And he was kind of like hesitant, but he was on board for the most part. So we got pregnant with my first child when we were actually not married yet. And I had a lot of guilt about just being Christian and wanting to wait and wanting to have a child in wedlock. So I think I carried a lot of guilt there, but we actually lost that baby at 6 weeks. And so I remember that like that yearning for motherhood was so strong, and then it was taken that like it was taken away from me, and I felt like really abandoned by the baby and kind of abandoned by Christ as well, because I didn't know like why that happened. I spent a lot of time just upset about, I was so excited to be a mother and then it was taken away. So I didn't have a lot of time to grieve because we fell pregnant again 2 months later with my daughter. And yeah, that pregnancy was fine, super healthy. I had a midwife and was planning to go to a birth center, and I actually felt very sabotaged in that birth. There was a midwife that was kind of like the apprentice that had to fill in because my midwife had a family emergency when I went into labor, of course. And so, yeah, the labor, they kind of sent me home. I was supposed to be in the birth center. They sent me home. I quickly, rapidly progressed and went to a hospital instead because I felt like I didn't want to go back to the midwives that kind of sent me home. And they weren't honoring how I was feeling, and they didn't believe that I was as far as I was. And so that hospital birth, for the most part, I felt like I got out of it unscathed. I still had a vaginal birth. They let us leave within 24 hours. Like there was nothing that, you know, they ruined for me besides they cut the cord right away when I asked to delay the cord. And I know it's like simple, but for me that was like really significant because it felt like I was already abandoned by my first baby and I felt like I needed that connection to this baby, and they cut it, and it was really hard for me to go on from there. So my daughter was totally healthy and fine. I had a lot of postpartum depression, and I think it all had to do with that birth trauma and also just the unresolved, I guess, abandonment that I felt from the first. And then now the birth went the way that it did. And so I carried that with me, and I didn't want to have a baby for a really long time. But during that time, I was learning a lot about birth trauma and how that affects postpartum. And I felt like, yeah, there was nothing wrong with me. There were things that happened that caused me to feel this way. It was not anything wrong with me. Like, I didn't have postpartum depression. Like, I didn't own it, right? It was something that happened because of outliers. And during that time, I started to really lean into Christ because I felt like he was a comfort for me and he was integral to my healing. But I can be honest and say, at that time he was still kind of like this man in the clouds. Like I was not in direct relationship with him. And it's not until now, having experienced what I've experienced with this birth, that I fully understand that spirit is inside of me. Like Holy Spirit is inside of me, right? It's not separate. So yeah, in the year, I need to address this because it was the major elephant in the room. When we conceived my son that year, we lost 5 family members. They died. And so, yeah, the first one to go, my father's mother, on Thanksgiving Day, which is really important in America, right? I don't know if you guys celebrate it here. And I was actually on the way to her house when we got the call. So that was awful. Then we lost my mother's mother right after that in January. And then we lost my mother's brother in June, and then I got pregnant in November. And I totally was excited for this baby, but the grief that I was feeling at the same time was just undescribable, honestly. I mean, at that point, it was undescribable. And I remember crying in the shower all the time. And I had this moment actually right before I had the baby. We were trying for the baby, but right before, I had this moment when I was crying in the shower, and a voice from God was speaking to me. And it was like, I've read this in the Bible with Elijah and this whisper from God. It was a whisper. And I heard this whisper. I'm getting chills thinking about it now just because it was quiet. It was a voice that told me I was crying because I felt abandoned by these loved ones. And they were so important to me. And I kept wondering, how was I going to go on without them? And in that moment, he said, I've never left you. I've never left you. I've always been right there. Your loved ones have left you, but I've always been there. And I realized what a dwelling place means. Like, we are a dwelling place for Christ, and the Holy Spirit lives in us, and it's not separate. And once I got that, it's so cheesy, but I swear it was like something clicked, and I had this immediate peace inside of my body. It was, I even remember like being, totally distraught, but then realizing, and then I got up and I'm like, oh, I'm not crying anymore. Like, like I just was like, oh, I'm okay. I'm gonna be okay. I got up, and it's like you pick yourself up, and yeah, then we conceived my son like within not very long. And so that peace, I think about Philippians 4, that peace that surpasses all understanding was absolutely present in this entire pregnancy. When I found out I was pregnant, I went to it. I was like, I don't even want to deal with a midwife, an OB. I don't want to deal with anyone because I just felt like, number one, I trusted that if God allowed us to be pregnant, then I was going to be pregnant. And if he allowed us to get to the point of birth, then I was going to give birth. And it was going to be fine or not be fine, right? But nothing that anyone who was a medical professional nothing that they were going to do was going to change what God's will was. And I had gotten to the point where I was so trusting and like one with the Holy Spirit that I just believed that I was going to be okay. So I talked to my husband about it, and we had decided to go to an OB just so that I could see that the baby was in my uterus. I don't know, like now I probably didn't even need to do that, but we went to see it. I was like, okay, the baby's there. And then they wanted us to like do the rest of the appointment, and I just walked out because I just wanted to see that the baby was in the right place. And then they were like, okay, so you're going to have this, this, and this. And I was like, no, I'm actually leaving now. And they're like, wait, you're not going to finish the appointment? I'm like, no, I'm good. We're done here. Thank you. Bye bye. So we left that appointment feeling great. And yeah, I didn't have any more, nothing, no interaction with anyone after that. The pregnancy was really great. I had made the decision because my daughter's pregnancy was so shrouded in the heavy feelings of losing the first baby, like the grief and everything, that I just decided that I wanted to enjoy this pregnancy. It was number one priority. I wanted to the bump dates, I guess. And I don't really have social media, and I actually got rid of all of it when I found out I was pregnant. So it was really just for myself. And so we did that each month. We got to the month 4, and the next family member died. So that was 3 before I had the baby. And then my first cousin was killed by a drunk driver. Actually, he was walking on the side of the road and he was hit, and it was a total shock. He was 30 years old. And yeah, we just couldn't believe that that would happen. And that was really hard. And I actually spoke at his funeral because he was really like a brother to me. And when I was leaving the funeral, I got a call from the hospital where my dad was, and they told me that he was in liver failure. So yeah, that it was really hard to continue to try and be happy and like enjoy the pregnancy. But I'll be honest and say there was like this kind of there were like two destinies at this point, because there was a part of me that still really wanted to honor the pregnancy because it was going so well. Like I had some nausea, but other than that, I was just like rocking and rolling, like just super healthy and like glowing and all the things. And then on the other hand, I have like these massive deaths in my life. And so, yeah, my dad was in liver failure, and I asked him how long he had to live. Not like they know, and they had actually said about 3 months, but he actually did not live 3 months. He passed away within the month. So that was in March, and then he passed away April 18th. So it was very quick. We had some great memories during that time because I was able to know that he was going, and I didn't have that with any of the other people that passed away. And I know that sounds crazy because it's 5 people that died, but I didn't have the chance to make funeral arrangements for any of them, and I did with him. Easter came while he was still with us, and I went to church with my family, and then he was in a nursing home at this time on hospice, and I let them go, and I just went to the nursing home alone, and I brought him like a little meal and a coffee because he really couldn't really eat anything, but he still would drink the coffee. But I just brought it because I felt like he should have an Easter dinner. And we sat and we watched UFC fights. That's what it was. He wanted to watch UFC fights. I'm like, we're gonna watch UFC. So we watched like an entire fight. And it's crazy because the box or the fighter that won this fight had Philippians 4 tattooed on his chest. And I had to talk about this story because that was what I was experiencing in my pregnancy. And then also Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And again, I'm getting chills because to see that was like confirmation, like you're going through horrible times. And in this moment on Easter, like the resurrection of Jesus, I'm being reminded that he is right there with me. He's with my Father. He knows this is in his design. And even though I was really sad, it was just a reminder to trust him, even in the loss of my dad and in the loss of everyone else. So that was amazing. He passed away within, I think, a week and a half. That was Sunday, Easter Sunday. And then the next Wednesday, he passed away. So that was like the last moment that I had with him. He got to touch the baby. He guessed that it was a boy, and he was right. So that was amazing. We decided to do like a little maternity video. And so we were just wandering in the woods. We love the woods. My husband and I love the woods. So we walked around the woods of our house, and spring was in full, bloom. And, we were just looking for different places to take pictures and videos. And he filmed me just kind of like wandering. And I had like a flower crown on and like a flowy dress. And it was amazing. I felt beautiful. And it was like a really nice, happy moment in all of the, sadness that I was feeling. So that was sometime between April and June. In June, we had a mother blessing. I'm not one to like have big attention on me. Like, I don't like to have attention at all, which is why I'm doing a podcast. But no, I don't really like attention. So I didn't want to have like a baby shower or anything. We did it with my daughter. And I just felt like a clown, like in all of them, like sitting in the front, like at this big chair, and everybody's looking at me. And so I didn't want to do that this time. So we did a mother blessing instead. And I just had 6 of my close friends, a cousin, and my mother at my house. And when I say it was one of the best days of my life, because they just totally honored me, and I've never, in like a very intimate way, right? It wasn't like performative in any way. It was like my closest loved ones, and it was all women, obviously. And we shared a couple of them are mothers, so they talked about their births. Someone was getting ready to get married, and so we talked about that, and we just like fully like engaged in womanhood through the day. And it was just so amazing. We ate great food. A couple of things that we had for my pregnancy were these coloring pages that were like affirmations, but they were Christian ones, so they weren't just like, so I definitely had Philippians 4:13 because I had to, like, it was God told me this is going to get you through. So we had that one and a couple other ones. It was like birth is when you hold hands with God, and I had them color it. So they each, had one and personalized it, and I had planned to put it up for birth. Something else that we did was a belly cast, and that was so much that was really fun because everyone had to like participate, so we're all like a big mess. Well, not me. Well, my belly was a mess, but everyone else had like the pasty hands and stuff, and so they took turns kind of like building the cast around my belly. And that was really nice, and just getting like that attention, positive attention to the baby was nice from people that I love. We did a string like around the wrist. So each person, they took a string and then they said a prayer over it, and then they tied it around my wrist. And they had the option of if they wanted to wear it too, they could, but they just wouldn't take it off until I told them that I had the baby. I think one of my friends decided to do that, but everyone else just did their prayer bracelet around me, which I was fine with. And then we ended it in a group prayer where they all laid hands on me, on my belly, and just prayed for me. And yeah, I just like left that night, or I stayed home, but that day was so powerful for me because it was like confirming, number one, that they believed in me, that I could do this, because all of them knew I was having a home birth. A few of them knew that I was doing a free birth, but either way, they were all like fully on board for this. And you don't get that. I didn't get that the first time, even when I told people I was going to do a birth center birth, like that was already too weird. So the fact that this time around, I had people who were like, yeah, you got this, home birth, great, let's do it. Let's do whatever we need to do in this house to get you ready to have this baby. So just to have that support, I was like, I'm gonna rock this birth. Like, I'm gonna do it. So that was in June. I was due July 21st. Around that time, I was starting to have some Braxton Hicks, and the same was true for my daughter, where like they happened pretty often, and it didn't really matter what I did. They say you can drink water and it'll go away, or like change positions, or don't move around too much. That didn't really matter for me. I pretty much had it all the time. And I think it had maybe something to do with my when I get pregnant, my belly is super far out, like just way out there in the front. And I think maybe that the position of the baby has something to do with it. So maybe my body is just trying to like figure out how to hold this baby up. So I was wearing a belly wrap to kind of help, just like the infant carrier. I just wrapped it around my belly. And like towards the very end, I would wrap it so that it was pulling up instead to kind of like hold my belly up. But I still was having those Braxton Hicks pretty often. And towards the end, so my son was born July 12th. So maybe 2 weeks before that, I was having stronger what I thought was Braxton Hicks. I didn't really like put too much stock in it, but maybe it was prodromal labor. I don't really know. I don't call it anything. It's just they were stronger than what they were before. But they always kind of fizzled out when I went to sleep. So coming up on the birth. So the day before, so that was July 11th, I decided I was going to become a member of my local library. And I think the for me, when I go into labor, I turn into a different person. So I feel like that was maybe the start where I was just like, I'm going to go to the library today because I don't have anything to do. And so I went to the I was getting ready to go to the library, and I went to the restroom, and I saw like the slightest bit of blood like in my underwear, and I said, okay, maybe something's happening, maybe not. I did tell myself, kind of in leading up to birth, that if I was going to go into labor, it would probably be the sign that would tell me that would be a bloody show, because that's kind of what I noticed with my daughter, especially because I was constantly having the Braxton Hicks. Like, I didn't know what else to think. So, yeah, when I had the blood, I just sent a text to my husband and said, hey, maybe today, but nothing really happened. So I went to the library, lugged my belly around, got some books that I never read because I had the baby, but got some books, came back home, just rested, had a really good night, like ate well. My daughter slept great. And then around 1 a.m., I was fully asleep, and I must have had like a pretty strong contraction because my husband woke me up, and he was like, you were yelling. And I was like, oh, it was in my sleep. Like, I didn't even know that I was doing it. And he was like, I thought you were awake. I'm like, no, you just woke me up. So I'm like, okay. So I just made note of it, checked the time. It was around 1 o'clock, and I just went back to sleep. And then a couple of minutes, and again, I don't really know how long it was. I woke back up, and this time I was awake and I was having a contraction. So I decided to go to the bathroom because, as I said before, these kind of like stronger contractions were happening before, like, and I didn't know if it was just going to fizzle out. So went to the bathroom, and I had like a significant amount of blood. So I was like, okay, I'm probably going to have this baby today. So I went back to lay down because I was thinking about like kind of the hormonal matrix, I guess, of like, let's keep doing the thing that started this. So I went back to lay down. I tried to rest. I was already kind of sleeping in like the mile circuit type, like with the leg up in the air. So I just kind of like stayed like that. And I did that, falling asleep and waking up for like 5 hours. It was until that maybe 4 hours. So 1 a.m. was when it all started. And then around 5 a.m. was when I was thinking I should probably start to acknowledge that I'm gonna have this baby. So I told, because this whole time I didn't tell my husband, I was just going. And I finally rolled over and I was like, you should probably call out of work because this baby's coming today. And then I don't know. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my daughter, but it was a weekday. So the option to go to school was there. And so I just decided, like, based off of what I was feeling, that I wanted her to go to school. So I texted my mom and told her to come pick her up because we were coming, she goes to school at about 7 a.m. anyway, and it was getting close to that time where we would get up, get her breakfast and things like that. So yeah, I texted my mom and told her I was in early labor, so come and get my daughter. And then I just stayed in bed. And I think at this point, I probably could have gotten up because I was getting uncomfortable, but they were so spread out still. So they were probably like 8 to 10 minutes apart that I still had a lot of downtime. So they were really intense when they were happening, but I had breaks. And I got it in my head that I just didn't want, it's not that I was in great pain, but I just didn't want her to see me uncomfortable because she's never seen me like that before. And I thought about when I found out that my cousin passed away, I was like wailing and it scared her. Like she didn't know how to process that. So it was just something like, okay, she's not the kid that's going to thug this out and like watch her mother be in pain. She's really sensitive. So I kind of just stayed in the room while Shane was getting her ready, and she came in, gave me a kiss and said good morning, and I told her that my tummy was hurting and I felt sick. And that was like enough for her to like go away. And my mom came, picked her up, and she came in the room. And I'll say this about my mother: she does not support free birth, but she loves me so much and trusts me so much that she was just gonna like be okay with it. Because when I told her, she's like, there's no one, like even for the pregnancy, she just kept saying, so you're not going to a doctor at all, like no one. But she never like made me feel bad about it. She was just like, okay, this is my daughter and she has a really strong head and this is what she's gonna do no matter what. So she came in and she was like, her hands were like all the way up here. She's like, hi, how are you? Are you okay? And I was like, yes, mom, I'm fine. It's not bad. Like I just kind of downplayed, I'm fine. It's gonna be a while. Go ahead. It's early. And that was enough for her. So she took my daughter, took her to school, and it was almost like I just needed them out because then when they left, then it was like more intense. And I was like, okay, we gotta let's go get out of here now. So I told my husband to get the tub because I didn't really have any plan. I should say that there was no plan, no birth plan. I was gonna have the baby wherever, could labor wherever. We kind of had like things to kind of cover the ground wherever I was, but I wanted to get in the tub because I felt like that might be good. Like that might help kind of with the intensity. It didn't really help because I didn't trial this before. The water does not cover my belly. So it was like, so we ran it and like he tried to get it to like the tip of where it might spill over, like if when I was sitting in there, and it still didn't even cover the top. So I kept taking like my child's bucket that she plays with and like pouring water on my stomach. Whatever, just to like get warm water like on the top of the stomach. But I will say throughout that, they were really intense while they were happening, but they were still really far apart. And so I tried not to get too heady, like in thinking about progress or checking the time, but I could just feel that they were really far. And now we were coming up on maybe like 9 a.m. So it had been about 8 hours. And I'm like, okay, I feel like maybe they're still the same. And so I thought about how my belly was in that weird position. So I did reach out to a couple of my free birth group members and I asked them, but it's like a delay. Like when you reach out to the group, then like the admin has to approve it. And so it took a while. So I ended up just wrapping my belly anyway, because I wanted to see like, do you think it's smart to wrap your belly when you're in labor? And I just ended up wrapping it because I felt like maybe the baby wasn't in the greatest position. And that's why it was like my body was trying, but the position wasn't great. So wrapped up my belly, got in bed because the water was soothing in the sense that like I hadn't really slept great and now I was tired. So got into the bed and fell asleep for a little bit. And then I woke up to the strongest contraction. Like it was so intense. And you know how there's like that wave? When I got to the top of the wave, my waters had released and it was terrifying. Like I was not afraid this entire pregnancy. Birth, I was not afraid. And it was just because I had woken up out of sleep. So I was like a dead sleep, crazy contraction, released of the dam, and then right. So I was just like overwhelmed. So I started yelling to my husband because he wasn't in the room. Shane, my water broke. And he comes in and he's like trying to do. I'm like, okay, I guess there's nothing for you to do. I just wanted you to be here. And so we checked. I was wearing a diaper already because I was bleeding. So I didn't want to like make a mess before I made a mess, I guess. So I was wearing the diaper. So we kind of wiggled it off because I wanted to see if it was stained at all. And it wasn't, it was clear. So after that, it really intensified quickly. And I was trying to get out of the bed because I wanted to get back into the bathtub. And I got out of my bed, rolled to the floor, and then started vomiting. And luckily, I had a bucket nearby because I had vomited with my daughter. So I kind of had an inkling like maybe this will happen again. So it was like perfect. I like fell to the floor, grabbed the bucket, and there we go. And then I was kind of like stuck in that position, like on all fours, because it's hard to explain, but I was feeling a lot of pressure in the front, like on my pubic bone and in the back. So I didn't know what to do. Like I was kind of like stuck in this position. And so every time I would get a break from the contraction, I would kind of like lean back to get the pressure off my pubic bone and then lean forward when it was over, just kind of like doing this weird seesaw. And my husband, bless his heart, he was holding my body up through the whole thing. Like he was in this weird, like contorted position holding me for a while. And I kept saying like, I need to get to the bathtub. I need to get to the bathtub. And he's like, it's not that far. We can do this. We can get there. So we finally got up probably after 20 or so minutes and got back in the bathtub again. For what? Because the water didn't cover my belly. Stayed in there for about an hour, had enough of that. And at this point, I felt, I think transition was there because I had totally left and now I was like on this different plane. And this is where I'm like, okay, God, here I am. I've been trying to do this by myself this whole time. Here I am. And I can't. You're here. You're way more powerful than me. What you're doing. You've been making women do this forever. And so it's your turn. I'm gonna like do a little hand pass, and that's when I started to just yell out, like I was yelling out the Bible verses that I had because I had placed them on the bathroom wall, and I was looking at those. I was yelling out the verses. I was telling him like what he promised me, like that he would bring me to this birth, and I was just asking him to help me, like to do this because I can't do it by myself. And at that point, I got up out of the tub, got back on the bed, and just took all my clothes off. And I was laying there. And this is really the birth portal, right? Like what they call it, where you're in between. Like you really are holding hands with God. Like I really believe that because he allows you into this sacred space, like where your body is bringing this soul in. And like I think it has to be that intense because you have to be reminded that this is not earthly. This is way bigger than anything any human can ever do. And I think that's the reminder in that moment where like baby's coming and God is escorting them here, no one else is. And so yelling to God, help me, Lord, help me. And I kind of like reached in just to see because I'm like, something's happening. Like I just know, and I could feel my baby's little head at the like not far, not like way far out, but like if I really reached in there, I could really feel like something. And I didn't have any prenatal care, so I didn't know if it was a foot, a butt, a head, who knows. But it was a baby. I knew that it was a baby. So that's when I like kind of came to a little bit because I'm like, okay, this is happening. And my husband was trying to convince me to get like on the floor. I don't know why. I don't know why he was trying to get me on the floor because if I think about it now, I could have like changed positions on the bed. Maybe it was for the cleanup. I don't know. I'll have to ask him after this. I really don't know. And it was because I was starting to push. So, and it wasn't intentional. I was just pushing at the kind of like at the top of each wave I started to push. And so we got down on the floor, and I swear, as soon as I got on all fours, it was like the power, it was nothing to do with me. Like the power that just took over my body was just pushing my baby down. And it got to the point, so Shane had gotten like all these lights and stuff so that he could see what was happening because we were in the dark still. And he was telling me that he could see the baby's head. And he's like, it's a head. I can see hair. And I reached down and could feel my sweet baby's head, like just right there. And I came to again. It was like in and out, in and out. And I came to again. And I remembered that I wanted worship music to be playing when he was, or when they were born. I didn't know if it was a boy or girl. My phone was right there, surprisingly, like right next to my face. So I just quickly turned on Oceans, Where Feet May Fail. Love that song. And I thought it was perfect for birth. So turned on Oceans and kept pushing my baby out because I could feel the head. I didn't really ever feel like the ring of fire, to be honest. Like I just felt a lot of pressure. And I had decided to kind of like slow down a little bit at that point because I could. Like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, it was totally out of my control until the baby was crowning. And then I felt like I could control in some way. And so I was like kind of breathing the baby out instead of like the big pushes that I was doing before. And so, yeah, once his head was like fully crowned, I decided I was not ready to have him. So he started to slide back up. And I was like, no, 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 internally. And so pushed again on the next contraction, and his head came all the way out. It was like not waiting. His body came out right after, and I was on all fours, so he fell between me. And the first thing I could see were his balls and his little penis. And I was like, "Oh my god, it's a boy!" And he was like fully there already. Like he was tensed up. His arms were moving, and he's wriggling, and so we knew he was okay. Picked him up, brought him to my chest, and he was covered in vernix, like so greasy and so beautiful. And he started crying right away, but not. He wasn't like screaming. It was just kind of like testing out, kind of, because he was. I think he was just like he wasn't afraid. This is the most peaceful way to birth, and he just kind of was like testing out his voice. And then I sat back, and my husband and I just wept, like holding him. And it was amazing. Like, so amazing. I couldn't believe that I did it. And then my husband was saying, "You're amazing. You did it." And I couldn't believe it. I just kept looking at him like, I just had a baby on my bedroom floor. It was amazing. So, yes, my husband noticed when I sat back that I was bleeding quite a bit. And I wasn't really afraid at that point because I know pregnant women have so much blood. So I was like, okay, yeah, maybe. So we did have like Angelica just in case, because some of the free birth groups had said to have that just in case. So I did take a little bit, but not the recommended, just a little. And I don't even really think I needed it because the bleeding stopped as soon as the placenta came out, which was like 8 minutes later. It really wasn't that long. I went to go sit on the toilet, and we had a bowl underneath, and I just did a couple of tugs, and it came out. Like I could feel it. It was ready to be birthed. So there was no issues there. We checked it to make sure that it was intact, and it was. And then we just kind of like carried the bowl around. And this part was so important to me to not cut the cord because of what happened with my daughter. And I feel like the birth was healing, but the cord was very healing because I was able to decide when we were going to sever him from that. So, yeah, that was the birth. We didn't really do much after that. We just kind of chilled out. My husband kind of cleaned up. It really wasn't that much of a mess. And I just held my baby, and we delayed for a couple of hours cutting the cord. We let my family know. My daughter came home within the hour because I had him at 2 o'clock, and she usually comes home around like 3:40, 4 o'clock. So it really wasn't that long after that they came home, and she met her little brother.
And thank you so much for sharing. That was beautiful. There were so many up and down moments where I was just like, I wanted to cry of joy, and then I'm laughing. And yeah, it was, thank you so much for sharing. I do have a couple of questions. So I thought now we could do a little Q&A. Nadia, do you have questions as well?
Possibly.
Okay. Well, I'll ask mine because I have a couple. So going back to your daughter's birth, when you had her in the birth center, did you have any pain medication in your birth with your daughter?
Yes. So
Yeah.
I had her at the hospital. We ended up not going back to the birth center.
Yeah.
So we had her in the hospital and I had an epidural with her.
So, because you had your epidural with your daughter, did you feel like you needed to do anything or prepare in any way for the idea of going into a free birth where you would only have like natural means of pain relief?
Not necessarily. I think maybe it was just mentality, like
Yeah.
a mentality shift. And I think I kept feeling like I didn't need the epidural with her the first time. It was almost like because I was going to the hospital that I surrendered to the process because I felt
Yeah.
like going into the hospital was going to take me out of the birth zone and like I was going to have to be fighting with them about things and I just kind of once I decided to go there, I was going to get all the things that
Yeah.
women get when they go to the hospital. Because I had gotten to 6 centimeters at home. And I feel like now the way that I progressed, like knowing what I know now, I feel like I probably would have been fine to give birth naturally the first time too. It was more so just kind of like succumbing to, I kind of gave up like once I knew that I was going to the hospital.
Yeah. Oh, you were talking about with your wild pregnancy as well, is that you just wanted to have that one scan for the beginning. What gestation were you at the time?
8 weeks.
I know another question that a lot of women usually talk about and ask is the placenta positioning, especially when we're talking about wild pregnancies. Did you have to work through anything with where the placenta location was? Was that a worry? Did you fear anything for when birth came in or anything like that?
Hmm, that's a good question. So we didn't. They don't really say anything about that, like in that visit, because I think it's just so early to know.
Yeah.
And then afterward, I guess I did think about it. I did some free birth like online courses, and they kind of talked about different, I guess, complications or things that come up in pregnancy.
Yeah.
And so one of them was placenta previa. So in case the placenta was covering the uterus, covering the cervix. I kind of learned about some of the symptoms, which would be like bleeding during your pregnancy, and I didn't really have that.
Yeah.
And they also said there's a couple other things like some sort of signs that I can't think of right now, but I didn't really have any of those signs. And so
Yeah.
I felt pretty confident. And then also I was using a fetoscope here and there to like
Yeah.
listen in on the baby. And someone said you could kind of like hear the placenta based off of the position. And I never really heard the placenta per se, but I felt like based off of where I was holding, like my baby's head was always down, I felt. So his heart was always low. And I felt like if
Yeah.
the placenta was there, wouldn't I probably hear it? Like if it was low,
Yeah.
and I didn't. So I just assumed that it was somewhere else. 'Cause I
Yeah.
couldn't find it myself, but I just assumed
Yeah.
that it wasn't low and covering the cervix.
And you were talking about having so many deaths, so 5 deaths leading up to and then during pregnancy. That was
Mhm.
incredible to hear. And I feel like this is a big question and probably a very come forward question is, was there any time during your pregnancy where you had to hold like life and death in the same space? And what did you do to, because I know that a lot of people, one of personally me going to the hospital is like, your baby's going to die, your baby's going to die, like that's always what we hear. And that's a big way that women are coerced into doing things that really they don't want to do. And so yeah, I think that's kind of where my question is coming, is that like, holding all of this death that was happening actually right in front of you and so intimately with being a father and family, that did that ever affect, or did that ever come into your space, like even your mental space, preparing for to free birth?
Yeah, it definitely did, especially because I had lost my first baby. So just
Yeah.
even dealing with that. I guess I didn't necessarily have the fear that I had with my daughter, but I think it came down to trusting God's will. Like that really was what it was, specifically with the pregnancy. But yeah, like with the deaths, it almost worked in the opposite way that you might expect. So one might expect that you would think more about death in terms of like the baby losing the baby dying. It was almost like, it almost felt like if I was going to lose this baby, then it number one was meant to be, but I knew I could handle it because I was already handling losing all these other
Mm,
people, if
yeah.
that makes sense. Not a great mentality, but it was almost like,
Mm,
hey, you have lost really close family members and you're still alive and you're
yeah.
still kicking and you're still going to work and you're still kind of like living life. And so if I were to lose the baby during pregnancy or even at birth, it would be devastating, but it's something that happens. Death happens. And actually it's the only guarantee in life, right? That you're gonna die. And
Yeah.
so I just decided if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen and I don't have any control over it. That's the
Yeah.
one thing that I'll say in the wild pregnancy, especially coming to terms with the total lack of control that you have, right, is what was kind of like at the forefront for me.
Yeah. It's a really big thing because you feel that sense of control going to appointments and getting information and things like
Yeah.
that. And then when you're not doing it, especially like, because I did a wild pregnancy with my twins and it was like no one believed me that I was pregnant with twins. I'm like, I'm 26 weeks pregnant, walking around telling people I'm pregnant with twins, and no one believed me. And I'm like, no, no, no. Like, I can feel these two babies.
Yeah.
And
Wait, so you
it's
didn't know? So you didn't get a
no,
confirmation of
I
that?
didn't get any scans
Okay,
whatsoever.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I
So
get that.
you feel that sense of control, like, oh, I can do X, Y, or Z. And it's a false sense of control because ultrasounds are only telling us what's happening in that moment. And the moment we stop doing the ultrasound, that moment's now over, and anything else
Right.
can happen and change. And the accuracy of them is so different as well.
I was just thinking in terms of like the care, right? The sense of control. When I something else I thought about was that if I did get any of those things, like if I interacted with the medical system and they told me your baby's, bladder is too big or whatever, I wasn't going to do anything different. There was nothing different that I would change about the pregnancy. I wouldn't do any intervention, wouldn't change a thing. So what would be the point of even knowing besides maybe adding some stress that doesn't need to be there?
Yeah. Absolutely agree. That's kind of exactly where I went. I was like, they're going to say this and it's going to come with, your baby's going to die or you're going to die. And instead of it coming from a place of information and education, it's just this fear. And we're to fear God. Like 100%.
Exactly.
We are to fear God, and then everything else, let his will be done and hand all that
Right.
other fear over to him. So, yeah, I didn't want to be making choices based on fear either. So it's really hard to kind of go in and then they're just like, do this, and you're like, oh.
That was definitely something that came up in the immediate aftermath of when we had the baby because I didn't tell anyone besides that core group that I was going to have the baby at home. And when people found out, they were like, "What do you do with your placenta? What do you do? How do you do this? Do you need to go to the hospital? What, is the baby okay?" And all of the fear came in after, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Thank God I did not tell
Yes.
these people before I had the baby." I'm glad that he's already here and like
Yeah.
fine because I can
Yeah.
only imagine what would happen if I told them before.
You were talking about like your positioning when you were on the floor, and you're on your hands and knees, and you're getting that pain in the front and the back, but you were also talking about wrapping your belly,
hmm
and you said that you felt like baby's position wasn't right. What were those two things kind of connected? Was that the sign?
I I kept feeling like maybe he was, if I envisioned based off of how far my belly was out and me knowing that he was head down, I
Yeah.
just assumed that, whether he was maybe sunny side up or even if he was facing the back, I don't know the terms, but if his back was with my belly the way that he should be, maybe he was kind of leaning too far forward, and that's why the pressure was on my pubic bone. I
Yeah.
didn't know which one were to be true, but I felt like either way, it was just like that pressure of the baby being that far out was putting so much pressure on my pubic bone.
Yeah.
And so that's why, like, once I put the wrap on, it kind of like pulled him in. And I think that's why it intensified so much, because once he was in, now it was going down instead of like this weird angle.
Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah.
like he was trying to engage the
Yes.
body, and the weight of him being a bit too forward or leaning out of the pelvis. Once you did pull him in, it was able to put that even pressure on your cervix.
Yeah. And I didn't mention, but he was moving the entire time when I was feeling him move all the time throughout the entire labor. So much so, once he had entered the birth canal, I was like screaming because I would have a contraction and I would feel him moving at the same
Oh,
time. And it was just, I mean, I can't say, I mean, it was painful, but it was more so just like the intensity of feeling this moving person, like he was going through the process. But yeah, that was something else. I could feel him move the entire time, like through the birth canal, the whole time. It was
yeah.
intense.
And you were talking about your husband just so in awe of what you had just done. And
Yeah.
I find that, like, because I have had a hospital birth and then free birthed, and I found the difference between my husband in the hospital after, not that he wasn't like super excited and super in awe of me, but it was just a different space. And I just wanted to know, did your husband feel different? Like, has he talked about it and like what you've done free birthing versus when you have done it in the hospital?
Yes, absolutely. I felt like in the hospital, he was just as traumatized as I was with just
Yeah.
kind of like how we were treated. It was kind of robotic and detached in a lot of ways. And then this time around, just having like total control. No, it wasn't total control, but like just having it be in with what we're comfortable with and being like what in our home and everything. He was definitely more comfortable there. But then specifically for me giving birth, I feel like he was like I was a queen. He kept talking about it after, and he even said that he felt like he had just run a marathon or like won an
Yeah.
award because he was on such a high. And I think we both were, but
Yeah.
we couldn't even sleep that night because we were just like still on this high. And then he was telling all his friends about it, like what happened, like telling them about the birth. And I'm like, wait, you're like really proud of me.
I
He's
love
like, you
that.
didn't, because he got to literally watch what was happening through the labor, but then also me pushing the baby out. Like he was right there. He was not afraid to like sit and watch. I feel like him getting like that front row seat and like being like my right hand man was like really powerful for him. But yeah, he definitely felt proud of me and like wanted to tell everybody about what I did.
I love that. My very last question, I've had a bunch, is about your postpartum. Like, is there anything that you like did or happened or any like that may have served you in a particular way that you felt was so nourishing, not only for you but your body, for baby's body, your bond together, and even including your husband and your daughter as well? Like, is there anything that happened that you would just love to share that wisdom with other women?
Overall, I had the plan that I was just going to stay in bed with the baby for as long as I possibly could, whether that be a week or a month. Like whatever I needed to do, I was going to do. And luckily, not luckily, thankfully, I had the baby in the middle of the summer and I work in a school. So we are out. So I didn't have to worry about going back to work for a long
Yeah.
time. I'm still not at work now. But so I stayed in bed. My husband did everything for me. He was home for a month and he cooked all the meals. Literally, I just laid down and did absolutely nothing. My one of my cousins who also free birthed her baby would come over from time to time just to kind of like drop off food. I didn't really want to share the baby with anyone, like as far as having other people visit. So she she was the only one, along with my mother, who were kind of allowed to come into the house. And yeah, we just kind of like stayed warm, wrapped in the bed, and didn't really do anything for probably the first 2 weeks. Like didn't even leave the room, and then The third week, decided to come out into the living room and see how that was. We stayed on the couch. We have a big open window where sun could come in, and just wanted to get sun on the baby and sun on. I felt a little jaundice. Like when I looked in the mirror, I looked a little yellow. And so I started to, he was fine actually, but I started to just want it to be in the sun to kind of help out with that.
Yeah.
So we did that for the next week and a half or so, and really just slowly moved into activity. And that was totally different from my first pregnancy. Like I did not do that. I was up and moving and doing stuff. So that was significant. And just having my husband know that going into it, like I'm not doing anything, was really helpful. And he absolutely honored that. Like even for showers, he's like, all right, you've been standing up for too long. So it was really nice. And I feel like that definitely helped with just healing overall, because I healed I feel like I healed pretty quickly, like as far as being able to move around. When I decided to, I could.
Yeah.
If that makes, it wasn't like I was pushing through anything.
Do you have any questions, Nadia?
I do have one, and it was when you were talking about the bleeding, and that even though you were having some blood come out, and you and your husband a couple of times just trying to figure out if this is too much or normal, because the eyes can deceive us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard because every woman can have or lose a different amount, and it's not just one set of blood loss is for everybody. So did you ever like close your eyes for a moment just to like ask God, or in your intuition just go, how am I feeling? And try to make that decision and going, no, I am okay. Or yeah, like how did you, it was okay.
A little bit of not like paying attention to it, but then I did just for a second. Like when I saw the blood, I checked in on myself to see like how was I feeling dizzy or anything, and I wasn't. I felt actually like really high, I guess. Like I didn't feel, I felt energized. I didn't feel like shaky or anything like that. So once I saw it,
Yeah.
I just kind of intuitively knew that I was okay. And then also like maybe it was a lot of blood for my husband, but again, I just kept remembering just knowing how much blood pregnant women have. So I thought, yeah, I probably have more blood to lose than what it seems. Yeah. And I also don't feel like it was pouring out of me. Like when I heard about hemorrhage, I heard like it kind of like comes out, you can't stop it. And I didn't feel like that. Like when I sat up, it was like blood on the mat, but it wasn't like dripping or
Yeah.
anything like that.
Yeah.
So I felt like it kind of like came out with the baby, if that makes sense. And I thought I should probably go check on the placenta because that's probably what is also causing it. But yeah, it wasn't a lot of conscious thought. Maybe a lot of it was just following that intuition.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually have more questions now. So with your it's more about the testings afterwards. So for yourself and baby. So did you feel like you needed to go and see anyone or do any testings for yourself or for baby, like for tearing, checking for hip dysplasia on baby and things like that? And I don't know what legally, like in your state either, what is
Yeah.
legally has to be done.
Yeah. Okay. So it's definitely different state to state. And so Connecticut is one of the highly regulated, like
Yeah.
legalized states. So there's all these hoops that you usually have to jump through for most things. I personally did not feel the need to get any checks or anything. I just held a mirror down to see like,
Yeah.
okay, does it look kind of the same from when I left it? And it kind of did. I kind of told myself that unless it was like a visible, horrible tear, I wasn't going to do anything about it anyway.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was fine. I felt fine. As far as the baby, so you don't have to do anything technically. You don't have to get the babies to a pediatrician or anything. But in order to get a birth certificate, they require that someone see the baby within 24 hours, or you give the earliest documentation of when the baby was seen by some medical person.
Yeah.
I still don't have a pediatrician for my He still doesn't have a birth certificate because it's taken so long to kind of like get this stuff together. But I reached out to a midwife who does home births and just kind of told her the situation when
Yeah.
he was 2 weeks, because that's when I realized that I did want to have him have a birth certificate. And we thought maybe we could use a lactation consultant, just like someone who saw that he was here,
Yeah.
and we couldn't. It had to be someone like a nurse, a midwife, a doctor. Like it couldn't be just anybody. So reached out to her, told her the situation, and she was happy to come to our house and see him here. And she didn't really do anything major. She pretty much did what a midwife probably does at a home birth, like afterwards. So she just weighed him, checked out his body, asked about how he was nursing. That's really it. Like she didn't do
Yeah.
very much. And she just kind of asked me how I was feeling. She checked in on how we were nursing, just see how it was going, and then gave her stamp of approval, like, yeah, he's okay, and then left. And I try to use, or I am currently trying to use that report. We've gotten some pushback, but legal with the town clerk, we've gotten some pushback with the town clerk here, and they're the ones who do the birth certificates. And they said we need to prove that I was pregnant. Like I already gave birth.
That ship has sailed.
So you don't, as far as I know, you don't give birth unless you're pregnant. So it's really hilarious to me that they have accepted the proof of birth from the midwife, but not proof of pregnancy.
You were talking about like your baby bumps. Can you use them, or that's just not? So it
No.
has to be like medically proven.
We had to get a notarized affidavit from 2 people who witnessed me pregnant during my pregnancy. So we had my mother-in-law and my mother sign, and it's hilarious because they're like, "How long have you known this person?" And my mom's like, "Her entire life." So
since before she was born.
Yes. So yes, I am still in the process because we still have not been approved. And we still have not proven that he is alive, like he is a person. So most recently I've submitted those affidavits and hoping that he will be approved to be a citizen of the United States.
Yeah. Like, where did he come from? I don't know. Yeah. Like, he's just hanging out. He showed up one day.
It's been ridiculous. Like, even to get the paperwork for the birth certificate, they had to print it up. Like, they had never had anyone have a home birth in this town before.
Wow.
And so they had to like find the documents somewhere on the internet and then print it out and then have me come pick it up, because they were like, "What? You had a baby at home?" And I'm like, "Yes, there's actually forms on your website that say that I can do this. Can you please provide them to me?" No clue at all.
Can you use your scan that you had at 8 weeks?
I submitted that. Yeah, okay. I submitted that, and that they didn't accept it for some reason. So I wish I could talk more about the state of Connecticut because it is so special.
I feel like there's probably a lot in common with Australia. We have states in Australia as well, and they kind of differ a little bit from each other. It's probably really similar. Like, there's probably a lot of similarities in that aspect, that we're really regulated. Midwives are heavily regulated here in Australia, and the idea that women who are of sound mind can make healthy, responsible choices for their own body, including their baby, while they're pregnant, giving birth, and then postpartum. It's such a slap in the face when this is just so heavily regulated, and just, it's crazy.
Unhelpful. It's incredible. It's supposed to be. I'm just wondering, like, who are you really helping with these laws and like with these guidelines and things? Because it's not helpful at all.
And what does it say about our society when the government says that we don't trust you enough to just sign a piece of paper and say, "Hey, I'm bound by this contract that I've signed that says I am X person, I have had my baby and we're healthy and this is my living child. And that not be enough, like that's a reflection of how unhealthy our society is. And that's not just in America, that's here in Australia too, and a lot of different countries around the world that we've noted. It's a bit of a shame. I feel like I've learnt so much. Every time a woman shares their story, I know this is our first podcast that we've done, but in person, Nadia and I both hold like birth circles and women share their birth stories. And every time we hear someone share, it's just like, it doesn't matter how eventful or uneventful it is or anywhere in between. Like you just learn so much. And I really do appreciate you sharing because I feel like I've taken a lot out of the story and a lot out of your faith too. Huge. I love that. If any women are going to listen to this and that's what they take away, they just take away encouragement of faith. That's our biggest prayer. Again, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. This is the first time that I've ever told my birth story. So, so it feels good. I feel like there's no one to really talk about it with. So thank you for holding this space for us.
Yeah, you feel like that people could be judgmental in a way, and you want to, but you also want to protect it.
Yeah.
Because it's so positive for you, and like,
right.
But obviously, something like this, where women and people are being warned ahead of time that it's about free birthing with Jesus, that you feel a bit safer in the aspect of at least us who are interviewing you, that we're positive.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you're spot on, Nadia. I'm very like forward. And so like when I was pregnant with the twins and people like, but you're not pregnant with me. I'm like, yes, I am. Like, watch me push 2 babies out. I had a different experience with my baby that I just had. I had a different experience with her because I really wanted to protect everything about my pregnancy, my birth, and my postpartum. And I've only just come out of hiding, like, the last couple of weeks. Hey, Nadia. I'm like, hi. And it was with people that like Nadia, who I really trust and know that she's not going to have this negative impact on my birth and story and stuff like that. I so agree that we just feel really separated because women are having these faith-led pregnancies and births and postpartums, and then it's like, well, they're not every community has that woman in it, and to be able to have a space that we have a space where, you know, we'd be able to use technology and stuff to be able to do it, because I think that women really do need it. And I want to have 1 million babies, so it'll very similar to you. I didn't want to get married. I didn't want to have any kids, and then here I am married 5 kids later, and I'm like 2 weeks passed after Bella was born, and I was like, yeah, I'm ready. I can do this again. Let's go.
Definitely. Yeah, I feel like I didn't want to have any more kids after my daughter, and this time around, and before I had him, I was like, yeah, probably 2 and through, they call it, right? And then after I had him, I'm like, maybe I could do this again.
Yeah, my husband calls it 11 is heaven. Like, instead of 2 and through, he's like 11 is heaven. He wants 11, so.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And I'm like, he's such a good dad. So like and I have amazing births, especially now that I found such a center in Christ with my births and pregnancies and that. Like, and I had a very challenging pregnancy with Bella and still centered in Christ. And I just really had to keep pulling back into him and into Jesus. And so, yeah, like, I'm like, we can do this 1 million times, God. Like, you provide all the babies and I will do what I've got to do. You've built me for this, so let's do it.
I love that.
Nadia and I would like to just end in prayer. Do you want to end in prayer, Nadia, or do you want me?
Yeah, I don't mind. So, Lord, thank you so much for today, which is probably Destynie's evening. And we just want to lift Destynie up in her story and just thank you so much for the journey that you've been on with her. And even though it was very testing at times and the things that we can't control, you showed her and told her at times that you had never left her and you were always with her. And she grew her faith with you. And we just thank you so much for her testimony and her wanting to share with anyone else that is going to be listening to this. And I just pray that they find this encouraging that you are a good, good Father, and you never leave us, even with all the trials that can happen and the testing of our faith. You will always be there with us. And yeah, any time she shares her story again in the future with one-on-one or with groups of women, I just pray again that your spirit would be on that, and they just find that encouraging, and whether it's for their pregnancy, current pregnancy, or future pregnancies, that they would find this story and this beautiful woman's story very encouraging. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah. All right. Well, I better go breastfeed a baby. And again, thank you so much. Like, incredible. So appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the show. Tune in next week for another episode of Freebirth with Jesus.
To share your story on the show, check out our website and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at awaken.birth. Don't forget you can watch this episode and more on YouTube.